Fetch it up! Fetch it up! Yep. Man's best friend. Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? Alright, time to go to work, man. Hi, and welcome back to the studio for episode 4 of the Winter Rose series. For the holidays, I'm getting the opportunity to sneak out here and get a bit more work done on this rose. So in the last video, you remember we basically got to the point where we were going to be soldering the petals together. And I've taken a couple of steps here. I've got together a little tin pot here that's liquid. As well as I have all of the petals laid out here, and I've got most of the buffing done as to where it's going to be completed, because once this gets soldered together, we're not going to get the opportunity to do any more finish work on the majority of these petals. So you can see that in this clip here. In that clip, you saw that, there's a ton of different textures on this, and I'm really happy with that. The majority of people wanted to see that, which is great. So some of the other steps I've taken, you might notice the elephant in the room here, which would be my crock pot. It's a little cold in the shop to be soldering copper, as copper is very thermally conductive. So if the ambient temperature is cold, this copper is going to be cold. Makes it a little bit more difficult to solder. So what I've done is I just get the majority of this sand up to around 20 to 30 degrees Celsius, and I just turn it off, and that holds that temperature for the majority of the time that I'm going to be in here. Also, that heat is going to help my torch run quite a bit better in these temperatures. So the first step that I would like to show you guys would be something along these lines. So you see this copper piece here. It's very clean, and it should be ready to solder currently, one would guess. But I'm going to take this and just stick it in this molten solder over here. And I'm going to take a quick video and show you guys a little bit of this process of what happens here. Here you can see I have a strip of copper that's been treated the same way as the petals, so the same amount of cleaning, except for a flux acid. I'm giving it the best chance here by allowing the copper to heat up and open up the pores and immersing it in this tin solder. Trying to even scoop some on here to see if I can get some to bond. Try to get it to freeze and cool. And as you can see, this thing comes right off. Didn't bond. So here you can see I'm just putting it in some flux that's suitable for copper and the type of solder that I'm using, and just kind of giving it a thin coat. You'll notice that the tin reacts a little bit with the acid, which is good, so that means that there's a cleaning action happening due to the heat of the tin and as a reaction with the acid in the flux. What that does is get rid of the oxide layer. So now this tin is properly bonded. I'll even pass the fingernail test. So basically the only way to get this off now would be material removal with a file. It's like permanent marker on your face. So I use the word tinning there, or tin, and that's a bit of a misnomer or incorrect. The process of what I'm doing is called tinning, or pre-tinning. This is solder, not tin, so it's a 50-50 mix. Some are 60-40, this one's 50-50. But the reason that I'm tinning these pedals it's really going to help me in my construction later on when I go to solder these together. And the reason being is that I will already have established a very solid tin to copper bond on each pedal before I try to put them together. So that way I'm not going to have a false bond that I think is strong, and it'll eventually end up breaking off quite easily. So as well as it really makes it quite a bit easier for the wetting of the solder. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do with the rest of these pedals. I'm just going to be tinning roughly around 1/8 of an inch up from the bottom. I've got them prepped inside and out for that, and the process is really quite simple. The first step would be grabbing a pedal and just doing a little bit of a preheat on the torch so that it's well above room temperature. Next, you want to dip it in the acid or flux, whatever you wish to call it. It's definitely a flux. Not too much. Just remember that where the flux is, the solder will go. So if you definitely don't want solder there, make sure you don't flux there. That process is going to be quite beneficial to me later on in the construction of this rose. I've got 20 some odd more to do here. Probably do them off camera. But before I do that, I just want to put the caveat in here that when in regards to soldering, I am a neophyte, or really new at it. I had a great teacher in my father and his father, but there's nothing that beats hands-on skill. So if any of you out there have a ton of experience with soldering or doing anything like this and wish to comment or help me out or anything like that, it'd be much appreciated. Anyhow, I'm going to finish up with this and you'll see me in the next cut. So here we are with all of the pedals tinned on the bottom, and as you saw in the clip there, I've set up a few things. I've got my soldering iron heating up. This is just a big old copper slug that I pounded out and put some wire on. I did the same tinning process to the end of this that I did to these pedals, and that will help in the soldering process and in wetting the solder out. I'm just going to put that back on the heat. You'll also notice this tube and a little bit of a hum in the background. I apologize for that, but this is smoke extraction, so that the smoke that's produced during this process from the flux and from the acids, they're not great to breathe in. So a little bit of mitigation goes a long way. But all that aside, here we sit now with all of these pedals, and they're ready to assemble. So the very first thing we're going to do is take this tin section here and this first pedal section, slot them together the way that they were kind of meant to be put together, like so. I'm going to get another shot in the vise here. So luckily I've got a pair of soft jaw, and this should be enough to hold it without deforming the copper too bad. I'm going to ramp up my torch now, so it's going to get a little bit louder. At this point, just take a little bit more flux and just flux the components that I'm going to be soldering together. Not too much, just a tiny little bit to help in the wetting. My torch is quite hot now. You don't want your torch too hot, but copper really draws the heat out. So you're definitely going to want to have a hotter than normal soldering iron. Alright, let's give this a shot. See how it shows up. I'll place it on there. That's definitely hot enough to melt. Here's my 50-50 solder. Shakety shake. Get that thing all soldered together. Let that cool, put my torch back on the heat. It's still hot, but there we go. Get our next pedal. Stick that to the outside like so. You kind of want to keep it a little bit warm. I should be using gloves or something here. It's that copper is surprisingly hot. There we go. That's in there fairly good. Again, touch more flux just to make sure everything bonds really well. That gap I'm not overly concerned about. Again, torch is quite hot. That base material going. Feed in some more solder. Wet it to what is existing. That needs a little bit more heat. Copper sure is a heat sink. Alrighty, here for take two on that one. Let's see what we can do this time around. Much hotter iron. Go. That's all wet together real nice there now. Let's see if I can't get a decent shot of that. That's going to be smoking hot. So, I mean, it's glued. Alright, soldered together. The pieces in there. There's a bit of a void on the back side. I'm going to clean that up when I go to do my next pedal. But you guys get the point of what's going on here. It's that's basically what I'm going to be doing, is layering these on, like so. Soldering the bases together until I have what you had seen roughly laid out in the sand previous. Yeah, I'm going to get to a certain point, and then I'm going to attach the stem. So I'm going to come back when I'm going to go to put the stem on. So we should be, I don't know, probably another half dozen pedals or so. So here we are, 6 pedals in roughly, and the bottom is soldered together there, and I'm really happy with how that's coming out so far. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. So as I said, I was going to attach the stem next. So I went ahead off camera and I did some extra tinning on one end and some distressing of the copper piece for the stem. And I'm going to connect this to this. So I like to call that my solder blob, as well as this is tinned underneath. So my hope is I'm going to put this in the vise, and then I'm going to use this on top, like so, and I'm going to use the torch as my heat source and hopefully just fuse one to the other quickly without using the soldering iron. We'll see if that works out. Alrighty. Let's give this a shot. It looks like I'm going to have to use the soldering iron just to tie that in. I wasn't able to get that base solder hot enough for it to fuse totally. So, nice little hot soldering iron should finish it off. And there we have it. Something that's starting to look an awful lot like a rose. So you'd seen in the clips there, the initial just trying to heat hadn't worked, so I had moved up to the smaller soldering iron, and I was able to wet out the edges. Okay, but eventually I ended up using the big beefy boy, which is still warm right now. This holds a ton of thermal energy, and the reason I needed to use this, and I was really surprised, but this copper rose is becoming more and more of a heatsink all the time. So the little iron, when I would touch it to it, it would suck the majority of the heat out and disperse it before I was able to really wet in or get this solder molten and connected and bonded all the way around. So the big iron took care of that, which is wonderful. So, I mean, it's taken quite a little bit of a process to get to the point where we are, where we have something that is rose-shaped at this point. And I've got a little bit more ahead of me. So I'm going to go ahead and probably finish out this video here. And off camera, I'm going to keep on trucking and keep connecting pedals. And in the next video, this thing is going to look quite a bit different. All of these pedals are going to be connected. And we're going to move on to the point where we're going to be putting the bottom bud section as well as the bud leaves. And that's going to slide up this and kind of hide all of our solder connections here. So that's going to make my life easy, as I don't have to be as ultra fine with this as if it were not going to be covered. So that's going to come up in the next video. I'm going to be doing the bud section, as well as we might look into putting some leaves off of this and maybe even some thorns. That's a question. So if you guys made it this far, thank you very much. And if you'd like to see some thorns or some other foliage coming off of the stem, just let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear. I have some ideas myself, so I'd like to open a dialogue and see what you guys think. Anyhow, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one. Oh, and take care.